realize it's neither federal nor a reserve, is created. It was planned at a secret meeting in 1910 on Jekyll Island in Georgia by a group of bankers and politicians, including Colonel House. And this transferred the power to create money from the Treasury of the United States government to a group of private bankers. It is probably the largest generator of debt in the world.
And we know from Isaiah 10, Micah 5, and several other passages that one of the key titles of the Antichrist is the Assyrian. The Assyrian.
We believe that the stage is being set for global tyranny. We're seeing the positioning going on that's going to make it very, very easy for a world dictator to take control of the structure. We know that Scripture describes just that, a world leader taking over a federation of global states.
We're going to look carefully at both Seleucus and Ptolemy because it unveils what's coming on our own horizon. We're going to look in Daniel 11, from verses 5 to 35, is a detailed rundown of the tensions between Seleucus and Ptolemy. Seleucus being called there the kings of the north, Ptolemy called the kings of the south in Daniel 11. Very key passage for us to understand. Continuing in Daniel 8, from verse 23 on, the language starts to go beyond its applicability to Antiochus Epiphanes. It says, in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Most scholars believe this is piercing beyond Antiochus Epiphanes. It's looking to the last of the line, which will be the Antichrist. A king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and he shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. Wow. By peace he shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. So most scholars recognize this as an allusion to the person we call the Antichrist. Well, let's take a look at Daniel 11 for what insights it will give us. The first two verses talk about the Persian Empire, and I won't go through the list of these, although there's some very important people here. Not only Cyrus, who is detailed in Daniel 5, and also Isaiah 45. There's a letter written to him by name by God 150 years before he's born. Xerxes I is probably we believe is the king of Esther, the book of Esther. And Artaxerxes Longimanus is the one that triggers the 70-week prophecy of Daniel. He gave Nehemiah the authority to rebuild the city. But from verse 3 and 4, we talk about Alexander the Great. And that, of course, has been detailed for us in Daniel 8 for us. And that follows then what follows after verse 4 are when the generals divide the empire. And again, we're going to focus on, and the passage focuses on primarily Seleucus and Ptolemy. And I won't take you through the details because we don't have time, but if you look through 5 through 35, you'll discover that there's kings of the south fighting the kings of the north, and the details there fit history so precisely that critics of the Bible have tried to argue that Daniel must be a fraud and must have been written after the fact. That overlooks the fact that long before this list is over, the entire Old Testament is translated into Greek. So it's hard for someone to forge into an already translated and widely distributed set of documents, but that's obviously nonsense. But the Ptolemies, we go through 6 cycles of the Ptolemies, and we go through 8 cycles of the Seleucids. But the most notable one is the last one, Antiochus Epiphanes, because he's so prominent in triggering the rebellion in Israel. So we'll leave it at that. But from verse 36 on now, we're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes again, but here again, the language will go far beyond Antiochus himself. Let's take a look at it. Verse 36, and the king shall do according to his will. There's the willful king. And he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that which is determined shall be done. Now this can be applied sort of to Antiochus Epiphanes, but the language seems to go far beyond anything he did. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. And in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end, now at this point, see, from verse 36 to 40, you can sort of argue that may be just flowery language talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. But from verse 40 to the end of the chapter, it's clearly far beyond Antiochus Epiphanes. But it's as if he's looking through him to the end time. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall also enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, Edom and Moab and the chief children of Ammon. Boy, that's a strange thing. This particular piece of ground, which we today would call Jordan, for some reason, eludes his grasp. Most scholars speculate that it's to give the remnant a place to flee to. But that's conjecture. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, and he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Now that's kind of interesting, especially if you've been following world events and you understand the Shanghai Pact, where China and Russia have joined forces against the United States by treaty, joined by most of the players in Central Asia. And when NATO had redefined itself as a global police force in 1999, that chilled not only our enemies but also our allies. But China and Russia and most of Central Asia signed the Shanghai Pact. And it's interesting that the threat he sees here comes out of the east and out of the north. Shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet, and it's interesting, most scholars recognize that must mean between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. And some scholars speculate that may somehow involve the temple that's described in the last few chapters of Ezekiel, because that temple is not in Jerusalem. And so there's speculations about that deserve some study. He shall plant his tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Well, let's shift now, and let's take a look at the book of Revelation. Chapter 13, of course, is the main passage of the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. The first two verses, John says, I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon his horns 10 crowns. And upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet was as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority. Who's the dragon? From the previous chapter, chapter 12, verse 9, it's identified, of course, as none other than Satan. But there's something else that's noteworthy here. You notice that there's a leopard, a bear, and a lion. That echoes in our ears because we remember those are the principal idioms used in Daniel chapter 7. The lion was Babylon, the bear was Persia, and the leopard was Greece. But you notice they're in the backward order here. See, when Daniel was given the vision, it was yet future. John is looking backward in time, so they're inverted. Interesting. But somehow this final empire bears marks of all its 3 precedents, and worthy of note. Satan has 7 super kingdoms.